In a world where heathen art was cheap and had too many helmets with horns on them, where it was hard to tell the difference between a painting dedicated to Odin and Freya from a Boris Vallejo fantasy art calendar, a world of chainmail bikinis and blonde Marvel Thor, one man stood up and said no. That man is Sam Fleegle. This episode of Heathen Talk is brought to you by Sam Fleegle at FaithfulSigns.com, featuring Norse mythology-themed art that explores the various legends and traditions of the ancient Germanic peoples. Faithful Signs offers prints, bags, and original art for sale from everyone from those interested in Norse mythology right up to the serious art collector. We'd like to thank Sam Fleegle for his support of the show and his contributions to modern heathen art.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Heathen Talk episode, whatever number this happens to be. 40, 41. Lauren is muted,
30,
so she can't correct.
38? Hang on, 30-something. I don't know.
37, according to Toby. We are, as always, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/heathentalk. We are on Twitter at heathen_talk. Mark loves it when you go and follow us on the Instagrams. We also have our own website, heathentalk.com. You should definitely go there. We have fun articles and stuff, and mine isn't finished for this week, so that'll be up tomorrow. Lauren, am I missing anything? Oh yeah, Tumblr. We are on Tumblr.
Yeah. Tumblr.
Do we need to talk about it? I mean,
if you have social media, you can find us, and we want you to.
I will say this, our blog posts and everything does get aggregated to our Tumblr.
It's true. On top of that, if you want to go over to iTunes and leave us a review, we'd appreciate it. If you want to leave us a review on your favorite podcast aggregator, do that. We want to hear from you. Send us an email. Get in touch with us. Tell Torin his beard is magical.
Because it is.
Whatever makes you happy. It's all right. Your cat's weird, though.
My cat is not weird.
So, I just want to comment on something that was said in the IRC. Yes, our voiceover is awesome for that commercial because it is my husband. So I get to hear that all the time. And speaking of which, congratulations to Sam. He's gone double on his Kickstarter and passed 250 backers today.
That's pretty fantastic.
And I'm going to go ahead and take all the credit.
Okay.
Obviously, it wouldn't have happened if he hadn't invested in a sponsorship of Heathen Talk.
Hey, it's cheap.
It's true.
Just like us.
Hey, slightly less expensive.
Frugal. So, toasting this week, we have a very special toast for a very special fan who has also been on the show. She is a super active member of the Heathen community up in Michigan. They have a group up there. They do pub moots. But I chose to toast her this week because she got married today. And that is Ashley Adams Harding now, who got married today to her new wife, and also known as Morgane if you guys hang out in the IRC. She's a friend of the show. She's been here with us since day one as a fan, and I loved having her on my last Ladies Night podcast, and she's just a great person and a super active person up in Michigan. So to Ashley, and also I would like to offer to also Alicia, her new wife. Hey.
Congratulations.
Congrats.
We're happy for you.
So, Josh, what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking one of my favorite, one of my go-tos. It's a Ninkasi's Dawn of the Red. If y'all can see that. It's an India-style red ale. which Torin will point out does not make it an IPA.
It is not an IPA. It's an IRA.
But it is delicious.
That's what I keep hearing. I haven't tried it yet.
We saw it in the store when I was up there. What is your excuse?
That I have so many other delicious beers to buy.
Yeah, but it's one beer. You just buy it and drink it.
Other delicious beers to buy. You saw my indecision on what I was drinking tonight. I have a dearth of choices.
What are you drinking tonight?
Well, now that you ask, I'm also drinking a Ninkasi beer. I don't know if you're going to be able to see the label very well. It's rather shiny, but it's Critical Hit from Ninkasi.
Oh my gosh, that is awesome!
Yes, the label is pretty much fantastic. It's got a wizard wielding a staff with a D20 at the top of it, and a hammer in the other hand, and a horn hanging off its belt. It's pretty cool label. I have to be honest with you. I wish the beer lived up to the label. I expect better from Ninkasi. This tastes like a barley wine that did not spend nearly long enough in the barrel. It's super hop forward, hop middle, and hop back. I can just taste a bunch of fucking hops.
So, are you trying to ruin my chances to get beer? Is that what's going on here?
I'm not, but I'm never going to sugarcoat it when I'm reviewing a beer, whether Ninkasi made it, whether Victory or Left Hand, two of my other favorite breweries, made it, or even if I made it. If it's bad, I'm going to tell you it's bad. And this beer, it's not the most horrible thing I've ever drank, but I'm not going to go back for it. So, there's that.
It's time. Make better beer.
It's time. Make better beer. So, Steve,
and send it to Josh.
So, Steve, I'm not sure if you've watched much of this show, but we do have a tradition after the toast, and we tell everybody what we're drinking tonight because our fans actually asked us to. So, what are you drinking tonight?
Well, I hate to tell you this, but I'm drinking water right now. My favorite thing to drink is Morgenstern's pomegranate mead, which is just amazing stuff.
That sounds really good.
I've never had a commercial mead that I thought was worth drinking, and John and Lisa Morgenstern make the finest substance on the planet as far as I'm concerned. If you're lucky enough to get a hold of anything they make, do that.
I'll have to look for it. And Lauren, you?
I'm drinking Diet Dr. Pepper.
Again, 2 weeks, twice in a row. Isn't it the same vintage from last week too?
It is, in fact. But I'm going to show off my knitting. I'm working on a shawl right now. It's a seed stitch shawl with a lovely little edge there. Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it. That I'm working on right now for a charity project. So if I'm looking down at my hands and you're wondering what I'm doing, I knit so I don't kill people. Just to let you guys know. So.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah. So
carry on, Josh.
Yeah, Josh. So I'm excited.
Sorry, I was interrupted. Someone was trying to offer me food because I haven't actually eaten yet.
Then you should do so.
I'm on the air.
Yeah. So I'm super excited that we were able to, after my screw up last time, we were able to get Steven on the air with us. I have heard lots of great things. Really enjoyed the book, and Ben speaks very highly of you. So.
Hey, you know, while we're at it, we should probably actually introduce the man.
I was just trying to fill time because Josh was distracted.
Oh, gotcha. So for everybody, playing the game at home tonight and listening to our normal professional rant, our guest tonight is Stephen T. Abell. You may remember us mentioning him in the past. He was originally supposed to be on our show with John Maynor to discuss heathen storytelling and modern myth building. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a scheduling snafu, and Stephen wasn't able to join us. So he's graciously agreed to come on tonight and help us make up for that. So, Steve, thank you very much for coming on tonight.
You're very welcome, and I wouldn't miss it.
So now that I've introduced you and have sort of pimped you out as an author and heathen storyteller, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work?
As a storyteller, I actually came at this this art form through theater. I used to do a lot of stage acting, and I don't know if you've ever done theater, but mostly you go to rehearsals, and mostly at rehearsals you stand around and get bored. And this one time I was at a music rehearsal for a Gilbert and Sullivan show, And I'd read everything on all of the bulletin boards in this room at least 17 times. And there was this one that advertised this storytelling group that happened to meet at the same facility a few days later. And I thought, well, this will be quaint. And so I went, and I haven't done regular theater since. The advantage of storytelling is now I have a lot more control over my time, and now I also always get all the good lines, which is kind of fun. So I've been doing that for about 20 years now. And about the same time that happened, my daughter was in the 2nd grade, and I went to meet her teacher. And her teacher asked me if we celebrated any unusual holidays in our household. And I told her, well, they might be unusual for you, but they're not for us. And she asked if I could come and tell the class about this, which kind of surprised me because this is a public school, and there are things that you're not supposed to talk about in public school, like religious things. I think there's a good reason for that, but anyway, the question was there anyway. And so I said sure, and then I spent the next couple of weeks wondering when the teacher called me what I was going to tell a room full of 2nd graders about heathenry and heathen holidays. As it turned out, she never called me back, but this one morning I was getting out of the shower, and I remember I stepped out of the tub, and I was drying my hair, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and all of a sudden I knew this great big story that I had not known the moment before. And that story is called The Solstice Guests, and it's the centerpiece of my book, Days in Midgard. So that's how I got started in this aspect of storytelling, and it's been a big part of my life ever since.
So, I picked up your book several years ago, and it's been one that I've lent out to many friends.
Thank you.
And they all have come back saying that they loved it. Personally, I think the storytelling is fantastic. When you sit down to write these stories, I know that you tell the stories. You're
Yes.
very focused on that. How do you transition from being a storyteller to a writer?
That was a really big jump. When I first started to try to write these things, I thought, well, I'll just sit down and write, and that didn't work. And I thought, well, I'll record, and then I'll transcribe the recording, and that didn't work. And I tried doing it on video so that I could get some of the performance aspect in it visually so that I could at least see what I was doing, and that didn't work. What it comes down to is the difference between spoken English and written English is huge. And so when you read my book, you're reading stories that started off being spoken stories, and I tried to transition them into written stories in a way that's sort of half and half. It works well enough as a written artifact, but if you've heard me perform, you'll recognize that it's still the same thing. But it's really difficult to make that transition. Most of the material in my next book goes the other way. Some of the stories started off being told stories, but I decided to take an adventure in stories whose primary existence is written. So, for example, in Days in Midgard 2,000 years on, there's a piece that is a long collection of diary entries and emails and doctor and police reports. And it's up to the reader to stitch all these things together into a narrative in their own head. It's kind of fun. But if you ever want to go from a purely spoken story to something that really works on the page, be prepared to work very hard at it, because it is just an immense difference. One of the things that's interesting is, as people, when we're listening, we fill in all kinds of gaps. We fill in all kinds of visual things. And when you're working with print, that's just not there. You're dealing with a different part of the brain.
So,
go ahead, Torn.
well, I was going to say, I figure I'll just, considering you discussed it, the idea of these being primarily spoken stories originally that are in the first Days of Midgard book, and that you have been in the past primarily an actual storyteller speaking the words out loud and everything, telling the stories out loud. I figured I'd jump right into my biggest, hardest hitting question of the night. Why in the name of all that is sacred is there not an audiobook version of this?
It's a matter of time. I think we'll have some other questions later on that come back to the issue of time. I refuse to do something that's not good quality. And just as writing down oral stories takes time and a focus on quality, doing a good audiobook also takes time and a focus on quality. Among other things, well, I'm married. I have a wife I love very much, and that takes time. And I'm a Silicon Valley software designer. I'm involved in the design of a new consumer product that you probably know of, but that I'm not allowed to tell you about. That takes time. Just a whole bunch of things that, frankly, have to take priority over things that I'd really like to do, like an audio version of Days in Midgard. Believe me, I've wanted to do that from the beginning. But, well, I'll tell you that it will happen. I just don't quite know when.
Fair enough. Have you considered outsourcing a narrator for it?
I've had offers of that, and I'd frankly be very interested to hear other people do performances. Being an oral performer, I'd really like to see other people perform these. It may be useful to just let somebody record. In fact, I had an offer of that just a few days ago.
So, in that vein, do you have any suggestions for the person who maybe wants to take one of these stories and perform it for their group? Do you have any suggestions of how to translate the other way from a written story to a verbal story?
That's another piece of challenge. I don't know if other people will have this problem, but I've noticed that before I write a story down, in some of my stories, the performance is an hour long, and I can just get up and tell them. And as soon as I write a story down, I can't do that anymore. There's something that happens inside me, and it becomes a matter of rehearsal after that. It's really annoying. There are three ways that you can impart a story orally to somebody. You can read it, you can recite it, you can tell it. Those are three different things. They come out of three different parts of the brain, and your audience knows which one you're doing. So if you really want to tell a story, what you do is you become familiar with it. You walk around the block a few times, and you just tell it without trying to recite, because that recitation thing is just deadly to people's ears. If you're just telling the story because you know it, it doesn't matter if you leave out this detail or that detail, because, like I say, people are very good at filling in what they need to have in the story all on their own. So mostly just become familiar with the story and trust yourself to do it. And afterward, you will kick yourself for leaving out this or saying that wrong. Just assume that's going to happen and cut yourself some slack. The fact that you got up and did it is what matters. And I'll be honored to have anybody do that.
I've got to completely agree there about not worrying about the details. Sometimes you lose them. I know I tell stories every once in a while. I do SCA, tell stories there, and I know one very talented storyteller. He's been doing it for probably 30, 40 years or more, and probably more, honestly. And he's well-known and well-beloved up in this area. And he'll be the first person to tell you exactly that. And I've listened to him tell the same story multiple times and, miss details here, leave details out there, even change details by accident. It's honestly because he's getting old and his memory is going. and he acknowledges that, but nobody has felt the loss in his stories.
Yeah,
Because
it's really it's a collaboration between the teller and the listener.
it really is.
Yeah, and what we do when we're telling stories. I mean, I have this title, storyteller. All of us are storytellers. I told you I'm a Silicon Valley software guy. One of these days, somebody's going to create synthetic consciousness, and it's going to be mostly a storytelling machine. That's a huge part of what makes us work as conscious entities. And so this is just natural to us. If we couldn't do it, if we didn't all do it, we wouldn't quite be human. So just let yourself do it and enjoy it. And the thing that's really exciting when you're dealing with, especially with an audience that hasn't encountered this before, we're used to so much polished media, recorded media, perfected media. When you actually hear somebody being a human being in front of you, it's kind of a shock to a lot of people. About 30 years ago, I had some season tickets to a local theater group, and there's one evening I didn't have a date, and so I asked one of the guys that I work with, "Hey Sam, you want to go to theater?" And he looked at me, kind of cocked his head sideways, says, "Is that like a movie? Only they're right there in front of you?" I said, "Yeah, that's what it is." And so we went to see this show, and it was one of the Dracula pieces, and it was done, and it had some clever special effects, but mostly it was people being vampires on stage in front of you. And when we left, he was just almost vibrating. He looks at me and he says, "Wow, that's a whole lot better than TV." Yeah, it is.
It's true. I've my roommate has actually gotten me into theater more and more, and I can say that there's definitely something lost in translation when you're watching a story unfold on a screen versus being seated in a theater and watching actors perform.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my background is performing arts. I was on the other side though. I'm a techie, and then radio, and it really is the same thing. Where you have that energy, it's almost a palpable energy when you're face to face that is just not there when you have. It's just not there, when you have that screen between you, or even there's a difference between live performance, even on TV, versus like the polished, super scripted, stuff we see now.
Mm-hmm. I just saw a comment on the screen about a one-man version of the Iliad. Something that a local person here in the Bay Area does is what we call epic days. She chooses some enormous story like the Iliad or other big stories from around the world, and then she chops them up into chapters and passes them out to people. She has this enormous room in her house, and we get together with a potluck and start about noon, and we finish about 8, and everybody performs their chapter. And you get to see, you get the whole story in one shot, but you get to see so many different performance angles from different people who approach it in different ways. It's a wonderful experience. I really have to recommend that people get a little gumption up and get together and do something together live. It's a great bonding experience. I think it's a great heathen experience also. It's part of our history, part of our culture.
Now that's something you brought up that's interesting about the bonding aspect of storytelling. And as within the heathen community, we are trying to create these very intentional communities and trying to come up with, new ways to celebrate rites of passage and create bonds that aren't necessarily there because we're not blood related to people that are in our tribe. I do find that a really interesting part of it, to have that, to kind of build those shared histories, and that's something that hadn't dawned on me before, but that does seem pretty important.
When I host a community event, we of course have a Sumbel, and one of my favorite topics at Sumbel is ancestors. And it's really fun for me when somebody who isn't heathen comes to one of these events. And, there are some things that they just aren't going to understand. But we start going through a symbol, and you see their eyebrows go up a little bit about what's happening here. And they get the idea that, yes, they're expected to participate in this. And when we're doing ancestors, by the time we get done with the room, even the people who are strangers to us, they're looking at us in a different way. They're looking at themselves in a different way, and our relationships in a different way, because we're talking about our families and where we came from, and it's a remarkable experience that everybody should have. Whatever your topic is, like I say, ancestors is one of my favorites. It just binds people together.
So
stories. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say stories of where we come from are often really powerful to people. In your book, some of the ones that hit home for my friends most were the ones that were set in the past, not necessarily the ones that took place in the fairly modern present, right? But the story of the farmer, I think it's the Yule guest.
The solstice guest, yes.
Yes, that's the one. I have friends who, they were like, wow, that was a really impactful thing for me. I can't believe that someone actually came up with this idea. And it's because it resonates with this where we come from.
Mm-hmm. I have to tell you that that's a story that I speak it, I wrote it, but I won't claim the story as mine. That was the first one, and that literally dropped in my head all of a chunk. One moment it was there, it wasn't there, and the next moment it was. As I go through my book, I read it from time to time still. The stories that are the best from my standpoint are the ones that I had the least to do with.
Torrin, you had a question or comment? And he's walking away.
Yeah, that's how it works.
There's another set of stories that I tell that begin. My mother grew up in a logging camp in Northern California, and once again, these are stories about where my family comes from. They have to do with growing up in this remote location during the Depression. They have a lot of impact on people also. So what we're talking about where we come from, once again, that seems to matter.
I had a question, and now it's gone.
Don't you hate that?
I do, especially since I run a podcast. It's always
yeah.
It's always pleasant to just forget what you were going to say.
Right. Now, the next book has stories set in current time, but as you might guess from the title, Days in Midgard 2,000 Years On, the last story in the book is set 1,000 years from now. And I dislike speculation, and I try not to write science fiction. It's half of a conversation between a sea captain who has picked up this guy who's afloat on wreckage in the North Atlantic. And I don't know if you've ever heard the original Bob Newhart comedy records, where you hear half of a conversation on a telephone. This story is kind of like that. So I have 1,000 years to cover, and I'm trying to do it so that people don't feel they're being science fictioned into heathenry.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well,
Fiction is a beautiful genre.
It is. Some of my favorite stories are in science fiction. One of the things that I hope for is that somebody will read some part of what I wrote 1,000 years from now. And I'd rather not be too wrong. So it induces some caution.
Well, the beautiful thing about science fiction is that with some exceptions to the fan base out there, nobody really expects it to be accurate, but they expect it to be an entertaining platform on which to have a story told about people.
Yes. Yeah. Now, one of my frequent Yule gifts to people, I go into used bookstores and I get a certain anthology by Gordon Dixon, and I pass those out to friends because of 2 stories in that book. They're definitely science fiction because of the platform, as you say, but it's really about people and the ways in which we're people. Those 2 stories in particular are about the things that we understand and the things that we don't understand and what we understand instead.
So, Torrin, you had a question before you got up right in the middle of me asking what your question was.
Oh, my apologies. I had to switch beers. Life's too short for bad beer. Well, what I was
Truer words, my friend. Truer words.
I know. I was going to ask Stephen would tell us a little bit about the stories that appear in the first 1,000 Days of Midgard.
Okay. Starting from the beginning, we're back at Thingvellir, at the Althing in the year 1000. And this story is told in the third person by about a fellow who has observed what's just happened. And he's going through the recent history and wondering what the future holds for him, what the future holds for his family. And I had the idea for that story before I went to Iceland. And I had looked up Thingvellir and I had seen pictures of it and I'd read about it. I'm glad that I actually went there to see it with my own eyes. It changed things some. If you've never been to Iceland, it is a starkly beautiful place. For those of us who are used to things on the California Sierra scale or the Colorado Rockies scale, it's not like that, but it's an amazing place. The second story is this story about this farmer in Sweden who is in an unhappy marriage with a disappointed woman, and on top of that, his livestock have been decimated by some disease that came through, and he's trying to get through the winter with his unhappy farm and his unhappy household, and he ends up with a couple of unexpected guests. Now, since this is a heathen-oriented story, you might guess that the guests are well received. What they turn into is kind of a surprise to some people. Inside that story, there are 4 other stories that are told within it. One of which, if you know the mythology, you'll recognize it, although you probably never heard it told in the first person. Has to do with some mead and some poetry. And the other one is I encountered the myths when I was about 5, when my mom read them to me. And you know the place in the mythologies where they're talking about where Embla and Aska are coming into existence? It's usually like 1 or 2 paragraphs. And there's more material here about what that episode was about. Beyond that story, well, let's see. We have the adventures of a gigolo that turn out differently than he expected. And let's see, there's a woman who is a financial wizard who is on vacation. And, well, I won't tell you what happens because that particular story, it's called A Short Vacation. It has what a lot of people call a Steve Abell ending, in which well, there is an ending to the story, but I don't tell it. My wife finds that story infuriating. She wants to know what happens, and I think it's pretty clear what happens, but I'm not going to tell you. I think that's part of us collaborating together on this story. One of my favorites is a performance piece called An Honest Day's Work, It's done in a dialect. It's about a tile setter who is working in a truck stop to replace the tile in the bathroom and ends up with some visitors there in the restaurant that are unusual, that you'll recognize. That one was the last one that I wrote, and I ran in terror of that one for years because it performs beautifully, but trying to get it to come across on paper was it was frightening.
It was fun. It was well done. That story came across very well.
Thank you. I'm relieved to hear that. The trick there is to get the dialect to come across without insulting the character who's telling the story in the process. And it seems to have worked well enough. My solution to that was, instead of trying to transcribe this dialect, I gave that character my fingers and said, "Here, you write it." And so what you're seeing is his writing, not my transcription of his talking. Worked out pretty well. And by the way, in the next book, you'll encounter him again. Let's see, we have a story about a fellow who grew up in a family of small-time criminals and decided that he was going to be different. Getting away from that might be harder than he thinks, and he has some help in that regard. The second to last story is about a fellow who has this antique musket, this old gun that he got from his ancestors. And by the way, that gun is a central feature in the story The Solstice Guests. There are several places in my stories where these stories are sort of loosely stitched together, where you'll encounter something that you've encountered before. The last story is about a fellow who, well, he's getting older, and he's out in his front yard one day with his son who's working on his car, and one of the neighbors breeding, well, you know, some people breed half-breed wolf puppies. Well, somebody did that, and his wolf got out and does a number on this fellow. And from there, we encounter him in a nursing home. And is he going to live? Is he going to die? What's that going to be like? And there's a character there who is, let's say he's poaching souls. I think you'll like the ending if you haven't read it. One thing that I've encountered in the last 10 years or so, these stories they're old for me now, and they still have a very personal impact on me that's getting more intense as time goes on. There's some of these stories that I can't tell anymore. I can't get through a performance. Some of the stories in the next book, I'm almost relieved that I will never get to perform one of them because I'm sure I wouldn't survive the telling. It's kind of fun being that emotionally involved with your own art. Did I cover the territory?
I think you did. You covered just about, at least a short word about most of what's in the book.
So, real quick, I want to interject. I know Torin has some questions, but I've noticed that a lot of the heathens I interact with are kind of starving for creativity. Mm-hmm. They want to create, and a lot of that comes out in ways that sometimes send either the wrong message or they send other new heathens down the wrong path. And mm-hmm. What do you recommend to heathens who really are the creative type but maybe don't have the philosophical and theological background to grasp the inner workings of a heathen worldview?
Oh gosh. Well, we all have our own private understanding of things, and anything that you do involves a risk. So, for example, when I started telling these stories at my storytelling group, I told the story about the tile setter who's dealing with these unusual visitors in the restaurant, and there are firearms involved, and one of my early audience members just almost went nuts that I told a story about guns. And whatever you do, there are risks in what you do. It may be that what you do doesn't work very well. It may be that your friends appreciate that you tried. Well, let me tell you something. Try. It's important that you do that. It may be that what you do will get better with time when you do it more and more. It may be that this is something that's done once, and, well, maybe you think better of it after you've done it once. Or maybe it's just something so special that it never gets written, never gets recorded, but you and your friends experienced it together. Those things matter. Of course, we like for our work to be propagated, to have an audience, but the private experience of close friends who are telling together is not to be discounted. As far as people who have, what different people's backgrounds are, it's important that we have people with different backgrounds speaking. The worldviews that we all conspire together to create, well, we need them from each other. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes I have an idea that's sterile. Sometimes I just need something from, I need some kind of nourishment from a different viewpoint. And so if you're nervous that you don't know enough or you're not good enough, well, please get over it, because what you have to say matters. Did I answer your question?
I think so.
Thorin, you had some things.
I did. My question really, and we asked the same question of John Maynor when he was on a couple of weeks back, is that you hold a relatively highly respected position in the heathen world, I guess you could say. As steersman of the Troth.
Yeah.
And which, for those of you listening at home that commented in the IRC, yes, I did intend to mention that during the intro. I just forgot, so get over it. And you're writing stories that are essentially sort of going down the road of modern myth making.
Yes.
It seems like it's a huge responsibility in that you have people that are going to take your stories with the same kind of weight that they take much older myths, especially new people and people who are listening to your reputation when they take in your stories. How do you personally deal with that particular responsibility?
First of all, I'm honored to hear my work described that way. Thank you. The most important thing is to tell a good story. When you're a storyteller, of course, you like people to tell you that you done good, that was a good performance, or that you made up a good story. But the most important thing to remember as a storyteller and as a writer is that you're there to serve the story. If you do that well, then everything else takes second place. If somebody tells you you did great, that's wonderful. But if there's any hint that you didn't serve the story well, then it was a disaster. Don't do that. You really need to get off of your own ego. However much gratification you get out of that, and believe me, I do. I love it when people tell me that this is a good story, this is a good book, they like my performance. But first of all, you have to tell a good story. There are qualities in a good story that I could describe, but first and foremost, they have to be honest. And it's the honesty that carries them forward into the future. Go ahead.
I was going to say, do you see personally a functional difference between a story and a myth?
Yeah, I do. Myth is It's the cloud out of which our thinking emerges. Um, there are myths that are more like Aesop fables that that have a point, and everybody can see the point. And there's a place for that. But one character of real myths is that they're kind of foggy. They're a little bit hard to put your finger on. Exactly why somebody is telling you this story isn't always clear. But nevertheless, it sticks. It has staying power. And that's because it's talking about something that matters to human beings. So I also distinguish between myths and legends, and I talk about this in the opening of my book. Myths are mostly about gods, and legends are mostly about people. And gods and people, we do different things, we work different ways, we have different stories to tell each other. I classify most of my stories more as legends than as myths.
Now, I do have to ask because I'm curious. What do you think, as far as what is developed in modern heathen storytelling? What do you see are some common threads that you might not see? Because I know you have experience with kind of the wider storytelling community. What do you see are common threads that you might not necessarily see in the overculture storytelling? And yes, I just said that so you guys would drink. We have a drinking game where every time certain words are mentioned, all our listeners have to drink. So sometimes I just throw them out there just to make people drink.
Okay, got it.
Overculture's one, Cascadia's one.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Warn me before you do that, Lauren.
Okay, let's see here. Overculture and heathenry in particular. We spend a lot of time on this word honor, which is one of those words that's kind of hard to pin down. I remember seeing a movie back in the 80s, I think it was called Prizzi's Honor, with Jack Nicholson and Kathleen Turner.
I have seen that movie.
And in this movie, the word honor is a really nasty front for the word fear, or the inducement of fear. Another word that's important is respect. People talk about, for example, respecting a rattlesnake. What does that mean? A lot of my stories have to do with honor and respect, but I try not to slap you in the face with it. In fact, I try not to slap you in the face with much of anything. I think that's bad form. I think people are smart enough to not need to read propaganda. Let's deal with the complexity of life, but distill it enough to make it into something coherent. So honor and respect, I think, are big topics. Family are big topics. I'm glad you mentioned John Maynard. This word is overused. John is awesome. He writes amazing stuff. If you've never heard him tell, he tells better than I do. It's really, really fun being in a community where, as well known as I am, that John's a better teller than I am, and he writes good stuff. Treat yourself to a John Maynard performance sometime. You'll be glad you did. Let's see here. Overculture versus heathenry. I'm not sure where to go from that, but honor, respect, family. I think those are the big issues that matter to a heathen audience.
So
curious. Go ahead.
Here's one that it comes up quite often, and at least on the subreddit it comes up, and I see it on Facebook a lot. As a storyteller, how would you show the difference between a warrior and a man who's forced to defend his own?
Well, I might have to write a story about that. Thanks for posing that. Uh, I think you'd find that in some ways they're different because of their life choices. In some ways they're the same because of what they have to accomplish. I mean, if we're talking about a warrior is just somebody who's good with weapons and goes out and bashes people, that's not enough. And so somebody who is doing that because they're trained to do it, we have certain expectations of them. If we're dealing with somebody who isn't trained to do that, but nevertheless has to do it anyway, I think seeing the contrast and the similarities between the two would be interesting. Thanks for posing that. I might do something with that.
Look forward to reading the story.
I want to point out that whereas most of my stories happen because I ask for them, some happen because somebody suggests something to me. The one I mentioned earlier that's about diary entries and emails and doctor and police reports was the result of me talking to a well-known Lokian who I asked him, give me an idea for a story. And they didn't miss a beat. He said, a con run by Odin and Loki together. What a great idea. That one actually spawned 4 stories. There was one that I tried to take that idea and it just wouldn't work that way. But then one day it turned over and turned into something else. And 2 other stories happened as a result of that. And then I went and took another idea of this, another run at Odin and Loki running a con together, and this one was fairly successful in that regard.
So we do from time to time take questions from our audience, and actually, technically in our audience today is Toby, though he's actually the one hosting the chat. And he wants to know, how can we tell stories which teach when it can be clear that we are still figuring these concepts out?
Be honest about it. Something that I tell people often, and I've mentioned this before, don't slap your audience in the face with your point. You need to have a lot of respect for your audience's intellect. I've often been told that I have too much respect for my audience, and I just go ahead and do it. Stories that teach. What's your standpoint here? Are you taking on the standpoint of somebody who knows, who's going to tell your audience what's real? That's a position I don't like to be in as a storyteller. Let's put out the situation and see how our characters deal with things.
Well, I think it's less about what's real and more about what is correct, what is right.
Okay.
So let me see if I can rephrase, because I think that there might be a crossing of wires here.
Okay.
A lot of stories that we tell when we're going back to the lore, the Eddas, the sagas, and these things, they have these core concepts of frith, inner yard, outer yard, honor, all of these things. But as modern heathens who are working through a reconstruction and revival process, we're still very much figuring those out.
Right.
So how do you construct a modern story that shares this core concept of what a heathen is, when even those of us, like, and I believe you've met them, my tribe member Michael Burke, he'll tell you we're still figuring these things out. How do you tell a story that teaches it to the new generation of heathens, and is honest about how we don't know completely yet?
Well, I think you've answered your own question. You tell a story in which I won't say there are ambiguities, but there are different choices to be made. And for example, one of the things of a Steve Abell ending is we get to a certain point where questions are going to have to be answered, and that's where my telling stops. At that point, it's the listener's story. I let people finish such stories. People do it differently. There's a book I need to read, but I've read descriptions of it many times. I believe it's called '96. It's about two men in the French Revolution who are on opposite sides of the conflict, and they're both trying to be honorable from their own standpoints. There's one of my favorite books is called The Twilight of the Sioux by John Neihardt, which is this long poem. It's written in pentametric couplets. And I'm amazed that everybody in America doesn't know of this book. And it's about the Indian Wars told from both sides. And it exposes the honor and dishonor that went on from both sides of that conflict. Let's take a look at the choices people have to make and realize that they're sometimes pretty difficult.
I think that that answered my question fairly clearly.
Okay. So give me another idea for a story.
Now, I do.
Let someone else take that because I don't want to come up with all the ideas.
Now, I do want to, since we're getting towards the latter third of the show, I did want to ask you, because you are steersman of the Troth, though I believe, if I remember everything correctly from everything I see that comes across the mailing list, your tenure ends this year, correct?
That's correct. I'm done in June.
There's a lot of discussion, and I am probably the only person on this show that has is a member of a national organization. I've been a Troth member on and off for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Not always been active, but
Right.
I've been a member. Yeah. And what, in this kind of age where we're seeing this kind of shift where people are getting more locally focused, and you have things like Facebook and all these avenues that traditionally people turn to the Troth to, to kind of networking, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Where do national organizations, what's their place now? Where do you think they fit in?
There are large currents and small currents. That's not a matter of judgment. It's just a matter of description. National organizations are there to provide some large currents. One of the issues that we've been dealing with in the Troth for a long time, I hate to say it is technical. It's our lamentable website, which has been a problem since we took delivery of it.
As someone who's visually impaired, that website is a nightmare. I've never been able to log onto my account. I've yet to actually see a copy of it online. Ben usually sends it to me because I can't see it.
Okay.
And I agree.
Well, I'm working on a new one, and I have shown it to the read, and so far they like what they see, and it's my goal to get this thing delivered by the time I leave office in June. The big issue right now is the database, but the goal of that new website is, right now, people want materials. That's great. But another thing that we need is a better way of promoting local events and to make Troth stewards more useful to the community. So a huge part of that website, of the new one, has to do with promoting local events, making sure that everybody knows what's happening this weekend, and it doesn't require a Troth webmaster to do that. The local stewards will be able to update those things themselves.
Now, as somebody who is a webmaster, I run our show website, I run an event calendar, it's hard. And getting people, people have such strong opinions on the Troth. It's hard to get people, just like, I hate to say it, the AFA suffers from the same thing. It's not personal to one side or the other. I think that might be an interesting effort. I'm curious to see how that's going to pan out, because I do say I do really appreciate the Troth publishing arm. I think that's probably the strongest thing the organization's doing.
Yes.
And I think that it is, of course, granted, I freely admit my biases to everyone. Ben Wagner is my kindred brother, so Ben
Wagner is an amazing man.
He is. I love Ben so much. He's so great, and we've had him on, and he's going to be starting a show with our network here pretty soon. But it's I do think that we are at a point in time when we're going to have to we're going to have to reevaluate, what national organizations really can offer. We had a question from the audience, we're here, why put it on the Troth website when that's available on social media and all these other venues that we have?
The answer to that has to do with the observability of the major currents. So if we have a Troth website where you can go to local page after local page after local page and see that things are happening in the community. Otherwise, somebody has to aggregate that visibility themselves. I think that's just a big point of moral support, is that this is more than just our local events. I run a local event consortium, let's call it. It's called Bay Area Heathen Holidays, and so we do a Yule dinner, and we've been doing campouts in the fall and the spring, and local events, face-to-face events, are where it is. We all love to read our books, but meeting people face-to-face and having a means to do that still matters, and just seeing a weight of that, a wave of that in one place, won't replace the local websites, the local Facebook pages, but it's all here. You can see that it's all happening in one place. I think there's some value in that.
I guess from my experience in ISF, we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that, because I don't know. I just don't see it. It's been tried so many times, and it's still not exactly working great. But
okay.
I will say we'll just have to agree to disagree on that.
Okay.
Because I do think that that's I do think that it's the localizing. I agree. We will agree. It's something we pushed very much here on the show, is the idea that local in face-to-face, that's what's important. It's not.
Yes.
In as much as I love sitting on here and bullshitting for 90 minutes a week with some really good friends that I have, heathenry was Saturday night when I sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours with my kindred, eating pork roast and cracking up and making stupid jokes and not talking about heathenry, just being heathen.
That's
so
right.
That is what's important to me, and I think that's interesting. So do we have any more questions up, Josh or Torin? Because I'm way behind on what's going on.
Well, while we're kind of getting those all
ahead,
together, while we're kind of getting all the questions wrangled together, I was just going to try to sum up what we've been talking about a little bit, or ask Stephen to sum it up for us. Is with all the discussions just had about the availability of social media, how much easier it is for people to self-coordinate and to handle things locally, et cetera, going forward in this changing social climate, what exactly would you say the continued function of national organizations is?
Things like our publishing arm, things that are hard to do. I mean, there's a lot to be said for websites. The gatekeepers have gone away. There still needs to be some organizations that are focused on production of quality printed media. I'm still a fan of paper. The idea that, well, for example, there's a clear distinction between the Troth and the AFA, for example, and I think it's good to be able to identify that, well, you're closer to this end of the spectrum than that end of the spectrum. So partly it's an identification mechanism. The idea that I'm going to use the H word here, which is hierarchy. We often talk about there is no ace of Pope. Let's hope there never is. But nevertheless, I think there's some value in being able to say, here's one of the centers of our community, and things branch out from there. It's a sort of loose form of glue that can help us reach across our local boundaries. For example, if you live in Missouri and you're going to Kansas or you're going to Minnesota, where do you go to find out what's going on, to find the people that you might connect with? I think that's an important goal, and certainly you can find that if you are good with your Google foo. But let's just make it easier for people.
Okay. Well, I think we've got a few questions from the audience gathered up. The first one I want to get to, just because he's bugging me about it, is from Ailglad. Does a story not reflect human concerns while myth is distinctly and inherently about people explaining the world to people?
Does a story... Please read the,
Okay, yeah,
read the question again.
I kind of need to reread it for myself.
Okay.
Here, I think I got this.
Go ahead, Josh.
Does a story not reflect human concerns, while myth is distinctly not... Nope, I don't got it.
How about let's
Let
see.
me re-ask it. Let me re-ask it.
Let's get the
Stories-
knots out of this. Let's get the knots out.
Stories are about what we care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't myth then be about what the world is about, what's going on, and explaining the
Right.
in-depth
That's what I'm getting out of this.
workings of the world?
Mm-hmm.
Stories tell about people, and myth tells about existence.
It talks about our relationship to the world in terms that don't involve physics lectures. We may make a lot of physical analogies, but for example, when we talk about Gununga Gap, there are all kinds of things that people can relate to there. All kinds of distinctions about distance and character. So yeah, as I said earlier, it's kind of the fog. Myth is the fog out of which stories emerge. Does that make any sense?
I think I get it, but that might be just because I write my own stories.
Okay. These are myths are they're more than metaphors, but they're kind of hard to put your finger on. They talk about so many things, about such a wide range of things in existence all at once. They provide us with our outlook. A word I learned the meaning of a long time ago is culture. A lot of people think culture is that's folk dancing and cuisine. Now, culture is the things that we assume, going all the way down, and that's something that's hard for us to recognize in ourselves, hard for us to escape. Myths are one of the things that provide our culture to us in some very indirect ways.
Okay, well, I asked Ailglad to rephrase his question since all of us were having a hard time parsing it.
Okay.
Now, his question is basically setting forth the proposition in a very simplified form that stories explain the world to humans. Myth doesn't explain shit. That's the simplified version.
Okay, I understand what he's saying. Something that really gets my dander up is when people say that myths are attempts by illiterates to explain physics. And if that's what you think myths are, I think you've missed the point. And frankly, I think that our forebears sitting around fires going back to the Stone Age and beyond, I doubt very much that very many of them mistook myth for physics. But they do have to do with culture, with outlook, with what we assume is good and what we assume is bad. And they do it in ways that are so powerful. The reason that people continue to read these stories is because they say something to us that transcends time. If we read stories about iPhones and automobiles and the current things, that's fine. But where are we coming from and where are we going and how is all this stuff together? By the way, one thing I want to toss in here, one of my hot buttons is what I call negatively phrased questions. For example, isn't it true? Don't you think? Or questions that have the word not featured prominently. Such things aren't really questions, and they don't elucidate anything. But they're very common in our culture. I hope you will join me in trying to stamp out negatively phrased questions. I think they do a disservice to us all. Next
I
question.
can completely agree with that statement, actually. Lauren?
So I have a few questions here, and I am
Sure.
editing them down for time and clarity.
Okay.
But something that is a hot button issue online recently, and I know it's come up in the Troth. It's talking about online virtual ritual, especially virtual bloat. And
Yes.
I know that that is I know that that's a tough issue, and it's something that I personally have gotten kind of some crap for
hmm
from some Troth people. But I mean, what I guess the question is, what is what your personal opinion? I'm not, because once again, you're not speaking for the Troth, you're speaking for
Right.
you
Right.
about
Thank you.
online ritual, and
hmm
where does it really have a place within modern heathenry?
Well, let's talk about our more recent origins. Through the 70s and 80s and 90s, up until the time that the web became real, um, there were how many people even knew that heathenry was a thing? I didn't know that heathenry was a thing until 2001 when I stumbled across it on the web one day. Even though I had essentially been heathen for most of my life, I just thought nobody else cared. Um, so, in a world where we are still fairly rare, and somebody wakes up in a dream and realizes that, hey, that one-eyed guy, I know his name now. And how do I find other people that also know who he is? It comes down to a question of, do you have something online, or do you have maybe nothing? Loneliness is a terrible thing, and the online things that we're developing are certainly not a substitute for getting together with actual people and seeing people face to face and shaking hands and tipping the horn together. But as a way of meeting people, as a way of stitching together our still rather sparse community. For those of you who are members of kindreds, more power to you. You have a wonderful experience. A lot of people don't have that option. So, whereas, yeah, we need to get together and press the flesh. I don't think that we should be denigrating people for doing what's available. That's what there is in some cases.
Well, I mean, one could argue that, and well, I say one could argue, I would argue that an online bloat is nothing. Getting together with people in a virtual space and speaking and discussing and having a good time and all that, that's fine. I have some amazing friends that I have never met in the flesh. Lauren is one of them. But I would never have bloat with her. I would never perform a ritual with her online because that ritual is just not a thing.
Okay.
And I think that's the question that's being asked here is your opinion on that.
I will disagree with you that it's nothing. I'd call it a poor substitute, but nevertheless, for some people, that's what there is. So we'll probably just have to disagree on this. We will agree that getting together with actual people is where it's at. But I won't judge people harshly for doing what they have to do.
Okay. And I will ask one more question on this line of
Sure.
topic, and then I'll leave off of it. Is it I'll try not to phrase it the way you were talking earlier. I'll just say that, in my opinion, the better thing for them to do would be to avoid bloat until they can do it in person.
Okay.
It's not that it's necessarily, that's not necessarily something that somebody has to do. and there are other things that we can do. There is still the home cult, the hearth cult, things that don't require necessarily to have a tribe around you. That without being able, but bloat requires things such as the defining of a sacred space that you just simply can't do online. So I don't understand why there is this necessity to do even the poor substitute, as you put it.
I'm not sure what to say at this point that I haven't already said.
I will.
Different people are going to respond to this differently. And by the way, that's one of the things that the Troth is big on, is that you and I can disagree, and that's okay within the boundaries of the Troth. Our boundaries are wide. We expect that people will get along, but we don't have to agree on everything.
I will say that something that I think is a potential issue here with my experience, and this is not a specific, this is a internet-wide kind of issue, is defining what bloat actually is. And that becomes, when you have an online bloat where it's just a bunch of people posting on a thread on Facebook or whatever, or daily offerings and calling them bloat, I think that can become a big issue in discussion, because bloat has the meaning of bloat, like many other things as heathenry's involved. Bloat has evolved, and there are still people who I feel are kind of stuck in the, I like to call the first generation of heathenry definitions, when when everyone still bought into the witch cult of Western Europe as being historically valid.
Okay.
But that's my experience with it.
Okay. There was a question in there, and it got by me. Can you toss it to me?
It wasn't really a question as much as I think that one of the issues is that there is a disagreement on what bloat even is.
Yes. Well, we have this old word, and apparently it's a cognate for blood. It's a looser cognate for blessing. I'm cautious about being careless with words, and so if we're talking about what does this word mean, let's be careful before we broaden its definition to the point that it has no definition at all. And that may be where Thor and I are disagreeing at this point. So yeah, let's be careful. And we are in a world that I hope that we can, well, in some regards, put behind us in another 40 or 50 years, when we aren't so rare that the only way to find each other is on the internet.
I don't know. I found a heathen.
I'm going to interrupt.
I was just going to say, I found a heathen in my macroeconomics class this semester, so you never know.
I'm going to drag us kicking and screaming back to the subject of storytelling, because there's a subject or a question from our favorite Brazilian. This friend of ours named Marcel, or I think it's Markle. Is that how we pronounce it? Markle.
Or Marshmallow. That was one of them.
We call him Beach Monkey.
He's our mascot.
He wants to know if there are any other translations of your story so that heathens in other parts of the world can enjoy it. For instance, he's in Brazil, so Portuguese would be nice. Or I know there's a Troth-affiliated kindred in Costa Rica, so Spanish translations.
I have brushed up against some heathens, particularly in Latin America, and we've talked about doing translations. One of the things that's a little bit frightening for me as an author is I would have no way of knowing if the translation was any good. But if somebody wants to take a run at that, let me know who you are. Let me know when you're done. Let me know if I can help you. I would love to see my stories in other languages.
So the answer is not right now, but Markle, if you want to do it, let us know.
I'm a bit defensive about my works in some regards, but one of the things about being a minor author is you want more people to read your stuff. And if that means doing it in Portuguese or Spanish or Swedish or something else, I'm happy to have that happen.
Hey, and I will say that I think that Markle would be a good choice of translator because as much as he bashes on his own skills, our little beach monkey both writes and speaks very good English.
Mhm.
I
when
would
he
love,
wants to.
yeah,
Even if he
I would
can't
love to
tell the
harass
difference
him to get
between-
him to do some of our other stuff that on Heathen Talk in Portuguese, but that's another story.
Folks, I need to go on hold here for about 10 seconds. Be right back.
Not a problem.
Let's do it.
So while we have 10 seconds, I'm going to take 10 seconds and tell you guys to, first of all, go to Facebook and like us. Go to our website, heathentalk.com.
After what?
Leave us
The
a
chairperson lined up.
leave us a feedback on, not feedback, a review. That's the word I'm looking for. Lauren can talk, I promise. Leave us a review on iTunes or on whatever whatever venue you think is going to be awesome for us, whatever you listen to us on. So please do that. It helps us, helps other people find us, and quite frankly, it's just kind of cool. So leave a nice one.
By the way, I'm back. We have some family business happening tonight. We have to take somebody to the airport pretty soon. So,
Gotcha.
okay.
So I'm going to ask this question because I think it's interesting. Where do you see heathenry storytelling and the troth in the next 10 years?
There are a whole lot of people in this world that would be much happier as heathens than as whatever they think they are now. It'd be good if we could reach them better. It would be good if we could do that without resorting to the proselytization that so many of us find so offensive, with good reason. With the troth, we are in a transitional period, and we've touched on some of those issues this evening. I hate marketing speak, but what's the value proposition for national organizations going into the future? That is an active discussion within the troth and within troth leadership in particular. Where are we going? Heathen storytelling. All the time I run into people, you mentioned mythology and Norse mythology, and everybody says, well, I read the Greek stuff in school because I had to, but the Norse stuff was the stuff that really got me. I hear that all the time. We are sitting on something that is a cultural resource and a source of good things for a lot of people. Storytelling is one way of projecting that. So is music, so is art. I'm often giving speeches about whatever your art form is. Do heathen art. Art is the thing that moves people far more than lectures, than logic. Art grabs you someplace else and doesn't let you go. The reason that I'm heathen is because I heard these stories at an early age, and they wouldn't let me go, even though I knew that nobody else did this. And then I discovered that other people did too. So let's take that as a hint. Whatever your art is, do heathen art.
I heathen knit.
Well,
You laugh, but I showed you guys that two-color hammer I did the other. Oh, they put up with me all the time. So, but I can understand that. I did have a question. What role does ancient myth play in future storytelling efforts? Should it be told or acted?
it should be told, or it should be both. We have all kinds of media, all kinds of forms. And let's leave the media issue out of this. I'm a performer. I like performance, whether it's single storytelling or choral works or rock bands. If you're a painter, all of it matters, and different people get reached in different ways. So let's not restrict ourselves to a diet of tacos only, however good tacos may be. It's my favorite meal, by the way. Let's do it all and reach as many people as we can. Did I answer your question, or did I go someplace else?
Works for me.
Okay.
Now, go ahead, Josh.
We are down to the last 5 minutes, and I know you've got somewhere to be.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the best place for people to pick up 1,000 Years or
Days of
your book?
Midgard.
That's the one.
The
Sorry,
easiest place to get it is Amazon. You can get it either in paper or in Kindle form. It's on the Barnes & Noble website, but most of my business comes through Amazon. If somebody wants a signed copy, we can probably arrange that, but Amazon will get it to you a whole lot faster than I will. And when the next book comes out, I think that's going to be in 2 to 3 years at this point. I'll do what I can to make sure the community knows about that.
Awesome. I'm a fan of your stories, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Well, I have some at this point that I can share with a few people, and so let me know how to contact you. Please don't everybody do it, but I do have some I can share, and I'd be happy to do that.
If you do want to get some of these stories shared, guys, you can always email us, and we will make sure that Steve gets those messages and try and play the intermediary there for him so he's not inundated with our tens of fans.
And like I said, in my life, time is a big issue. And but nevertheless, I love hearing from people. And I never know when another story is going to appear. One of the things I'm looking forward to about not being a steersman anymore is I think I get back to making new stories.
I imagine it'll also take off some of the pressure of speaking for the Troth versus speaking for Steve.
Yeah, when I'm doing which is kind of a hot issue right now.
Yeah, you didn't have like a controversial blog post or anything in the past month at all.
Oh, no, not at all. No. On the one hand, only the read speaks for the Troth. However, I being a steersman or various read members, I think it's important that we identify ourselves not as speaking for the Troth, but nevertheless, we're the people who are the current leadership, and I think it's important for people to know who we are and what we think in the role that we're filling at the time. Something like this is politically fraught in ways that are hard to believe. And if you're sitting in my chair, you have to believe them. You have no choice.
It's one of the advantages we have as a podcast is we really don't care who doesn't like us.
Yeah, well, part of the issue of leadership is that sometimes you have to decide that you have to decide who your constituency is. You have to decide in some cases, what services you're going to provide, what kind of thought frameworks are going to be in this organization. It's a tough issue, especially with the Troth, because, as I said, we aren't a thing. We try very hard to keep it so that people don't have to think all the same to be a part of this organization and get something useful and meaningful out of it. A lot of people aren't up to being Troth members, frankly. A lot of people think, well, this is good for me, and so it has to be good for everybody else too. That doesn't work in the Troth. If you want to talk about what you do, great. We'd love to hear it, and I mean that. If you want to say this is what you have to do, that's not what we do.
Real quick, I just want to, I know we have a few Troth members in the audience, and I know Lauren is a member. Just want to give a shout out to everyone who is in the Troth who are working really hard to make sure that their voices are heard and that they are active members within your organization working really hard to bring it forward in the way that they see heathenry should go.
Yes, this is an organization that we're still small enough and new enough that we don't have the kind of momentum that, for example, the Catholic Church has. The Troth happens because people get in and do things. And those people are people such as our listening right now. If you want to join an organization like this because you want to invent yourself as important, once again, that's not going to work. If you want to get in and do things that turn out to be important, love you for it. I'm eager to know you.
It is. It's 8:30, and
Yes.
we have been talking for 90 minutes. And I know, Steve, you've got to get over to the airport for family business, and
Yes.
so we don't want to keep you any longer than we have to.
I want to thank you for hosting a hospitable hall this evening. I've enjoyed talking, and perhaps we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. One question before you go, Steve. I know that this year Trothmoot is up here in our neck of the woods in the Cascadian region. Are you going to? I'm empty. Are you going to be up here for that?
Yes, you bet. I'm the steersman, and I'm turning over the cloak. So of course I'll be there.
Fantastic.
And I'll look forward to seeing you there.
Well, I wish I could come. I'm kind of putting everything into Cascadia Moot, which is a couple weeks before.
Ah, okay. Well,
you're welcome to come to that as well.
Thanks. That's a bit of a drive, but there are so many things I wish I could do. If I were independently wealthy, there were a whole lot of other things that I would do, but one has to make a living and keep a home.
So, as always, everybody, we appreciate y'all tuning in to listen. We really appreciate Steve being on the show tonight. If you want to read his books, Amazon is where I got my copy. If you're a Barnes & Noble fan, you can get it there, apparently. On their website, though.
Yes.
And as always, y'all are doing it wrong.
You're not the boss.
Theodish Belief next week. Y'all have a good one.
By the way, folks, do heathen art.